Are for the Cabinet Secretary for Local Government and Public Services, and the first question is from David Melding.
The Cabinet Secretary make a statement on the grants provided by local government to deliver public services.
Local authorities deliver a range of grant schemes to provide support and services locally.
Cabinet Secretary, thank you for that very concise answer. The Welsh Government's proposals to amalgamate several grant funding streams into a single grant, the Early Intervention, Prevention and Support Grant, will remove the ring-fence protection for several streams such as supporting people, the Flying Start Revenue Grant and Families First. Now, in my region, this could have a detrimental impact on an initiative called the Davies Partnership, which is extremely popular and has provided vital support for children at very difficult times. Some constituents have informed me that if it wasn't for the help that and support that the Davies Partnership has given them, they would have had no way of getting through some extremely difficult experiences. Now, I understand that Welsh Government officials have made some inquiries into the future of this grant, and that Cardiff Council has confirmed that any new arrangements will ensure that the services provided by the Davies Partnership will continue. Do you think it's really important that successful schemes are taken forward in any new funding arrangement, and that we maintain best practice? We don't need to reinvent the wheel constantly, and certainly when our constituents tell you something works, it should be maintained.
Can I say, in answering the question, Presiding Officer, that if any members have particular issues about particular funding streams and particular groups in their constituencies or regions, then we're always happy to take up those particular issues and those specific issues, both ourselves and the local authorities concerned. But in terms of the new integrated grant, I will say to the member that it will still be ring-fenced to focus on the most vulnerable groups in society. We are considering how we further develop our approach to monitoring outcomes to ensure that we do not see the outcomes that the member has described and which the member quite rightly fears. I accept that there is concern about that. But it is also important, and I hope members also consider this, that we are integrating grants that all have in common a need to intervene early, support individuals and households to live independently and achieve their potential. I think members across the whole chamber will agree that people's lives and challenges that they face do not fit neatly into the structures which we can sometimes build around grant schemes. And therefore, I believe that integration is the correct way forward, but clearly we have to do that whilst maintaining services to vulnerable groups in society. The purpose of this is to improve things, not to cause the difficulties that he describes.
Leanne Wood.
The heat of summer can be just as dangerous as the cold of winter for homeless people. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, sunburn and sanitation all become serious issues for the growing number of people in Wales stuck on the street. Cabinet Secretary Luke's story came to my attention over the weekend. So desperate was he for water, Luke was reduced to drinking from toilets. On our streets, in our country, under your government, desperate people are forced into inhuman indignity. Today, the charity Wallet has called for urgent action. Central government must now work with local authorities and the third sector to take immediate action to help these desperate people. So, water and sunblock are a particular priority for homeless people in these conditions. So can the Cabinet Secretary please tell me what urgent measures he plans to implement to ensure that homeless people can cope in the current weather conditions?
Can I say, Presiding Officer, I saw some of those reports myself, and my conclusion isn't dissimilar to yours. I think it is an appalling thing that people in this day and age have to resort to those measures in order to sustain themselves. I think everybody will agree with your conclusions on that and will wish to agree with you in terms of your approach to that. I read the same report today as you have, and it fills me full of horror that people in this country are living in that way. The Minister for Housing is in her place for this question session. She has heard what you've had to say, and she will respond to you. But let me say this. This government is wholly and completely committed to resolving the issues of homelessness, as you say, in the summer and in the winter, across the whole of this country. And our resources will always be prioritised to meet the needs of those people who are most vulnerable in our society. And the Minister is as committed to that as I am.
Question 2.
question 2, Neil Hamilton.
Will the Cabinet Secretary make a statement on support provided by local authorities to homeless people in Mid and West Wales?
The 5 local authorities in Mid and West Wales have successfully ended homelessness for 2,907 households and successfully prevented homelessness for 2,421 households since commencement of the Housing Act in 2014. We have provided over £900,000 directly to these local authorities last year for homelessness services in addition to the RSG.
I thank the Minister for that informative reply. Unfortunately, homelessness in Wales has been rising in recent times. In 2016-2017, the average for Wales as a whole was 82 people per 10,000 households. That's up from 52 in the previous year, although part of that increase may be explained by improved data collection. But nevertheless, it's still a worrying trend. And we all heard what the Cabinet Secretary said a moment ago, and I thought was quite a moving response to the leader for Plaid Cymru. Carmarthenshire figures are much higher than the national average, well over 100 in 10,000 designated homeless people. I'm concerned to ask today about one aspect of this, which is that proportion of homeless people who are ex-armed forces veterans. An Northern Ireland veteran, Chief Executive of Veteran Assistance UK, says there are 13,000 homeless veterans at a UK level, but the figure could be higher. We don't know what the figures might be for Wales, but it's fair to assume that there will be quite a number of veterans, ex-armed forces, people who are sleeping rough and are homeless. Carl Sargent was a great friend to the veterans, and it was responsible for significant improvements in provision for homeless veterans in particular. I was wondering, therefore, whether the new Cabinet Secretary, I know shares Carl's concerns, and you in particular, Minister, whether you would consider going further than the Code of Guidance which was issued in 2016 and give social housing priority to ex-servicemen and women and those returning from active service as a step to ensuring that armed services personnel get the aftercare service they deserve.
I thank you very much for that question, and completely agree with you about the worrying trend in terms of homelessness, particularly rough sleeping. But I think that we can be proud of the record that we do have in terms of prevention. I gave you some of the figures of the thousands of people who've had homelessness prevented and relieved in your region. And the figure now across Wales is 14,000 families, which I think is something to be celebrated. And I know other countries are looking at our legislation really carefully to see what they can learn from us. But nonetheless, as long as there is homelessness and as long as there is rough sleeping, then clearly we need to be doing more work in partnership with those local authorities and our other partners. In terms of support for people who are leaving the armed forces and for veterans, I know that the housing pathway has been in place and it has had some success, but I've also been having some discussions recently with representative of the Royal British Legion in terms of what more we can do to be supporting people who are veterans and also people leaving the armed forces and also their families as well, because often they find themselves in difficult positions regarding housing and potentially facing homelessness when divorces happen and so on. So it is a complex picture, but one that we are very much engaged with and keen to see what more we can do to support veterans.
Angela Burns. Diolch, Gareth. Minister, I would be keen to get a greater understanding of how local authorities measure and collate the reasons for homelessness. As you know, in my constituency, we have the case of a significant number of Park Home residents who, through the changes in law made by Welsh Government, are under threat of becoming homeless. Now, in response to a letter of mine, you said that you'd already had your officials to be in touch with Pembrokeshire County Council to talk about their potential needs if they become homeless. But I would like to make the point that these are very elderly people, they are very vulnerable, they've sunk all their life savings into buying their park home, and for them to face this at their time of life is really just a complete I think, abrogation of duty all round. I wondered what further action you can take on this. You know, I know you make the point in your letter to me that they have until 2019, the park home owners, to start making small adjustments. But some of these park homes are very, very finely balanced. Pembrokeshire may be the first place where this issue has raised its head, but I am concerned that throughout Wales there may be other park homes where they are on a knife edge in terms of their ability to carry on going. And if we're not careful, we will suddenly find a very vulnerable section of our society made homeless at a time of their lives when they are going to be find it very, very difficult to manage that. And I do think that we need to have a more proactive response to how we're going to handle the unintended consequences to the legislation Welsh Government put in place.
I thank you very much for raising this issue. And, of course, the legislation is not yet in place. It will be subject to a vote of the whole Assembly in the early part of next year. And, of course, the approach I tried to take was a pragmatic approach, trying to be fair to both the park home owners and also park home residents. And I know that the Conservative Party was very much pressing the approach of completely abolishing the park home fees, which would have had a very different impact, I think, on park homes. I think that I'm quite limited in terms of what I'm able to say on this particular issue now, because I understand that there is potentially the intention to issue some court proceedings. So I'd probably leave it there for today, and if I am able to say more, I'll write to you.
We now move to questions from the party spokespeople. UKIP spokesperson Gareth Bennett.
There have been a number of successful planning applications recently for student accommodation in Cardiff. Some people have observed that virtually every major housing block granted planning permission for central Cardiff in the past 18 months has been for student accommodation. At the same time, we have a second so-called student block considering applying for change of use so that it can let its rooms to non-students due to lack of demand from the student population. We also have a large block in Newport which is no longer being used exclusively for students. If there is a lack of demand for the blocks that have already been built, why are more student blocks being built, I wonder? Is the Welsh Government aware of this issue, and what are you doing to regulate this area?
I thank you for the question. I'm certainly aware of the issue in terms of there being a large number of student accommodations actually within Cardiff which aren't being occupied by students. There's a particular difficulty in terms of changing those accommodations into non-student accommodations, of course, because my understanding is that the regulations surrounding the different types of accommodation are different, so there is an issue there in terms of space and so on. I know this is an issue which the Minister with responsibility for planning is also very much alive to, but my advice to local authorities certainly would be to look at very closely at their local housing needs analysis and to be organising their planning and decision-making around planning in accordance with those local housing needs.
Yes, thanks for that response. I'm glad you are aware of the issue. I think there may be a need for perhaps closer involvement at Welsh Government level in this area, because the local authorities, certainly in Cardiff and Newport, may not be doing enough about it. I think that we may be heading for oversupply of student accommodation. Certainly we know that the expansion of higher education cannot go on forever. There will not be an endless supply of more student numbers in Cardiff, Newport, or probably anywhere else in Wales. I think what we may have here is something of a scam. It may be that the universities are deliberately creating an oversupply of flats for the student market so that they can change their use by the back door and use them subsequently to let out commercially. We know that there are less stringent rules applied to student flats than to commercial developments, for instance, which you alluded to in your answer. Are you aware that the universities could be duping the local councils into allowing these developments of student blocks, which the university chiefs know full well may be used subsequently for commercial letting?
I think there's an onus on universities and on the local authorities to be having some serious discussions together in terms of their projections of local needs for both students and for the non-student population, and to be planning their new builds and their what's available in terms of accommodation locally in that way. I'm not sure that there's a role for Welsh Government in terms of stipulating the number of student accommodations that should be available, but it should be very much, those decisions should be taken on an evidence-based and a needs-based approach.
Yes, you cite the need for an evidence-based approach, and I'm sure you're right in that. But there may be implications for your ambitions for affordable housing in Wales, which you were telling us about in the Assembly this week. Certainly, we agreed that we have a shortage of affordable housing here. Now, commercial developers, when they build new housing estates, have a certain legal obligation to provide an element of affordable housing. Developers building so-called student blocks are under no such obligation. Unless the Welsh Government becomes more aware of what the universities may be doing and investigates the practice, then there is a danger that you are allowing the universities and their partners in the construction business to undermine your ambitions for affordable housing. So are you aware of this threat? And I would ask you again, do you intend to do anything about it?
Well, the Minister with responsibility for planning has already said that she intends to issue a wide-ranging review of housing and planning rules over the course of the summer. So I'm sure that this will be one of the issues which are drawn to the fore and drawn to attention within the course of that consultation. And it would be an opportunity then in order to opportunity to consider whether there need to be changes in that regard.
Plaid Cymru spokesperson Bethan Syed.
Okay, I'm going to talk about drug issues, so I don't know if that's... wasn't asked if it was...
You've indicated that your question is to the Minister.
All right, okay. Well, in the first instance...
Have you? Is that your understanding?
It's Vaughan Gethin.
Oh.
I'm happy to take the question.
Yeah, well, okay, we'll see if this cross-government work then. Fine. My first question is with regards to drug use and misuse in some places which have reached high levels, scarily high levels. And a report earlier this year highlighted that since 1993, deaths as a result of heroin use have increased significantly. As well as this, there have been a worrying rise in county-line drug crime, with drug dealers and gangs increasingly targeting smaller communities and moving out of large cities in England to come here. And I know in South Wales West we've heard of stories in Swansea and in Neath with it's within the top 10 places in England and Wales where deaths have risen, and other drug uses such as spice are also on the rise. I understand you are working with the police in relation to this, but I just wanted to understand how you're working with them so that we can tackle this issue head on. Oh, okay.
You haven't heard the answer yet. I'm grateful to the member for the question. We are working closely with the 4 police forces in Wales on this matter. I've met with the officers dealing with serious and organised crime in Wales to discuss the matters that she does raise. They are very serious matters, of course, and affect all of our forces across this country. So we are working with them. I hope over the summer to put in place structures whereby we can formalise the working we do with the police forces at the moment. Members are aware, of course, these are not devolved matters. Neither drug policy nor policing is devolved. So we are working in areas where we do not have control of the policy agenda, but we do clearly have a great influence, I hope, in the way in which policing can be delivered. So we are aware of the issues. I'm particularly aware of the issues that you describe in Neath, and I hope that we will be able to work with police forces to deliver the sort of response that you've described.
This next one is both to do with this issue and housing, so I'll see if you can both stand up potentially.
Kind of
well, I wasn't
throw
asked,
the question out there. And
I wasn't asked this time which minister, to be honest, which one I was directing it to, as usual. So that's, I think, why the confusion has happened.
So your question, this question is to who? Make it clear now, and I'll ask the Minister to, or Cabinet Secretary to respond. Which one do you... no, the Cabinet Secretary will be responding, and don't put me in this position again.
Well, I mean, because, I mean, this is why this is an issue that may be confusing for the government in terms of who responds to what, because of the fact that there is that issue with regards to the link between deprivation and drugs and the issue with regards to housing. And I think that's something the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs has confirmed in relation to this issue. Wales Online last year said that one heroin addict told Wales Online that he wanted to go back to prison where there was more support available, and this person person was homeless, a man who had no realistic access to housing for his particular condition. But that means that we need the right type of housing, and we know of instances in various communities where, for example, there may be a row of flats or there may be a row of houses where people in that particular flat may all have drug abuse issues, and if they are put into that same experience, then they will not be able to get over that addiction. So my question was with regards to the Housing First pilot and how we could ensure that if you are going to make those pilots work, how those who are struggling with drug abuse problems are able to overcome that if they are put in a position where they feel they may not be able to, if they are put in a housing situation that may not suit them.
I'll say very gently to the member, it's not the government that are confused on this matter. The issues that are being described are clearly important issues and affect a great number of people. I've met with prison governors in Wales to discuss some of the issues that she raises in terms of the impact of substance misuse on those who are detained on the secure estate in Wales, the treatment that they receive both within that estate and when they leave. I believe that there are good examples across Wales where there are being put in place some excellent opportunities for health boards, particularly to intervene to provide support for people who do suffer from substance misuse, both on the secure estate and then to ensure that they have the treatment available to them when they are released. I accept completely that there is a long way to go on this, and I don't believe that the policy environment that's been created by the Home Office is always very helpful in helping us to achieve our ambitions. But it is something that we're actively debating and discussing with both our police forces, our prison facilities and the prison service in Wales, but also with the third sector and other support services, providing services to people who are in this situation.
Well, I'm glad you said there's a long way to go, because I've had a particular communication with Swansea Council Homelessness Working Group chaired by former AM Peter Black, who recently wrote to Councillor Andrea Lewis, the Cabinet member responsible, with a pretty damning outline as to how the city deals with the problem, particularly those with complex needs. The working group noted that within Swansea, any client who wishes to be scripted must first self-refer to Abertawe Alcohol and Drug Assessment Service on either a Monday or Tuesday morning, and these referral hours need to be made more flexible and dramatically extended, as clients who don't make it on a Monday or Tuesday must then wait a week then for another opportunity. And once referred, it will take as much as 6 months waiting list to be scripted, and then there is another 12-month waiting list to go into rehab. Surely this response isn't good enough to what is a rising problem. I've seen the work that the working group has done in Swansea, and nobody seems to want to take responsibility, ABMU, the council or health. So if we're going to be ensuring that those people get the support they need, how can we do so when the system seems to be moving so slowly?
Can I say, I do recognise the difficulties that the member describes, and I think there are issues where we have a settlement that is jagged and broken. And I've made that case on a number of occasions, that the way in which policing particularly and penal services are administered at the moment does not provide the best solution to enable us to provide the services that she's describing to people across Wales. I accept that, and I hope that the Home Office, Ministry of Justice and other parts of the United Kingdom Government will listen to that case. In terms of the provision of services provided in the Swansea area, clearly I'm not familiar with the issues she's raised this afternoon, but if she's willing to write to me, I will take up those issues and ensure that there is a response in the sort of comprehensive and holistic way that she quite rightly expects to see, because I agree with that. I believe we do need a far more comprehensive approach to substance misuse in terms of treating people, maintaining people in accommodation where necessary, ensuring that they have the means in order to be treated and treated properly to remove that misuse, to enable them to go on and live their lives. And that is our ambition, and that is what we're working towards.
Conservative spokesperson David Melding.
Following on from yesterday's debate on affordable housing in Wales, I would like to touch upon some important broader concerns that weren't raised in the debate. My concerns particularly regard the future-proofing of the increase supply of housing that we need, and how we can build homes at volume that meet the needs and demands of future generations, particularly regarding energy efficiency. We are currently experiencing the struggle of modernising homes that weren't future-proofed when they were built originally, or indeed with any sense of adaptability in mind. And ideally, we need to learn from history and not repeat this mistake. So what support is being given to the sector so that it can build at volume the houses that we need to the standards that are going to be sustainable in the 21st century?
Thank you for the question. And of course, our innovative housing programme is certainly at the heart of our response to this serious challenge that's facing us in terms of creating homes which are low carbon, carbon zero, ideally. And we've got some excellent projects coming forward now and being built, and we're learning from them already from our last year's stream of projects. But this time we're very keen to build on some of those projects last year, but also look for projects where we are scaling up. So we've invited projects for this second year, and the application is closed this week for projects on a grander scale, really, so that we can start scaling up some of the exciting work that's already been undertaken through the Innovative Housing Programme. Also, we know that although we're doing a huge amount of work to try and support SMEs back into the sector, we do need to ensure that the volume builders are working in this way as well. So we've done some work with our home builder engagement programme in terms of what we can be doing in future, looking potentially at the future of Help to Buy. That's been extremely popular, as you can imagine, amongst the volume builders, but it is an important lever that we do have, so we need to be considering how we use it to achieve our broader aims across government.
Thank you for that, which is in part encouraging. And as you know, the Climate Change, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee is indeed looking at this whole issue of efficiency, energy efficiency in housing. And our evidence has suggested that a significant number of barriers to delivering transformative change in house building in Wales at the moment. The Home Builders Federation expressed concern that transformative change will result in fewer houses being built, and other organisations, including Caerphilly County Borough Council and the Federation of Master Builders, Cymru, echoed concerns that there are already a number of challenges to building the number of affordable homes needed, and particularly if housing targets are to be met. Now, this doesn't sound like the sector are prepared for the challenges ahead, and I think that we've really got to push them, because we need much more response from them and ambition. And for instance, we see this week the UK government has released its ambitious Road to Zero strategy, which includes a proposal for all new homes in suburban England to be fitted with electronic car charging points. Now, this is the type of integrated policy that we need, and I do hope that the Innovation Fund is a great idea, but it needs to lead quickly to mainstreaming those sort of great developments that we know are going to work, such as charging points built into new homes as standard. And I do hope that you will challenge the sector, particularly the private house builders, to improve their practice.
Thank you. I certainly think that there is this is the time now to be having that challenging discussion with the volume house builders, particularly because I was quite disappointed to read some of the evidence that committee has received, which almost suggested that everything's fine, let's not change anything, but everything's not fine, and we do need to change things, because we are currently building houses that I suspect in years to come we will be coming back to retrofit as well, and that's an expense that the homeowners don't want, it's an expense which government doesn't want. So we do need to be changing the way we build houses. I do feel that the Innovative Housing Programme that we have here in Wales, alongside all of the great practice that we're watching evolve in other parts of the world as well, is putting us to a point where we are on the point of a revolution in the way in which we build houses. And I would love to see the volume house builders be part of that revolution. Traditionally, it has been the small builders who have been able to, or been willing to take the risks in terms of building homes in a different way, and we're absolutely supporting that. So the Innovative Housing Programme this time is now open to private businesses to take those exciting steps, but it is for the large builders to be stepping up to the plate in terms of changing the way that they build things. And we're absolutely committed to working with the sector, but we're not afraid to be pushing the sector where we need to as well.
Minister, we in the Welsh Conservatives recently released an urban strategy that will create, we hope, cities that are fit for the 21st century. I'm glad my colleagues at least have read the paper. I've set an exam, don't worry. And this includes some elements of housing policy, though we will be producing a further document specifically on housing in the autumn. But one area that we did look at in that strategy was green roofing. There are housing developments now throughout England, one example being Embarking in London, where developers are exploring the use of green roofs on housing because of the positive impact they have on thermal insulation, stormwater attenuation, improved air quality, improved water quality, creating habitats for pollinators, and improving one's sense of well-being and the number of green spaces around us. I think that the Welsh Government's innovative housing programme could be an obvious way of exploring this type of innovation in Wales, and I do hope that we will see some pilots coming forward now in terms of green roofing, because some UK cities now clearly see this as a very good way of developing effective housing in the 21st century.
Yes, I agree, and I've certainly read your document, and I look forward to the housing document coming forward in the autumn as well. I share your excitement about green roofs, and we see some really good examples already. The Down to Earth project in my own constituency in Gower has built buildings with green roofs, and they found it to be not only good in terms of the structure of the building, but actually good for the soul in terms of the people who are working there. And it seems to be something which creates a kind of environment which certainly contributes to good well-being, alongside the important role that it plays in terms of decarbonisation and so on. So there's plenty of opportunities there, but it's not only within the housing portfolio or the housing part of my work that I'm keen to explore this. I was at a recent meeting of the hub, which is starting to work in Ammanford and Cross Hands, and they're looking at regeneration projects in the Carmarthenshire area. And one of the pieces of work that they were doing in terms of preparing the buildings that they're going to be introducing to increase jobs and so on, they're including green roofs there. So I think that green roofs should be thought of as part of our regeneration ambitions, as well as part of how we see the building of houses particularly.
Question 3.
Question 3, Julie Morgan.
What plans does the Cabinet Secretary have to promote electoral reform in local government?
Following the consultation held last year, I made an oral statement on these matters in January. I will include electoral reform provisions within a local government bill we expect next year. I will work closely with local government and others in order to raise public knowledge of the reforms that are planned for the 2022 local government elections.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Has the Cabinet Secretary had any indications from local authorities that they would consider moving to a proportional representation system for local elections? And would he agree that such a system would be a fairer system and may help increase interest and participation in local elections?
I have to say to the member, I have not received any indication of those matters from any part of local government. But I have to say I do agree with her. Like herself, I agree with the single transferable vote system, and that is my preferred system as well. And I guess we will both be arguing for that formulation during the consultation in the Welsh Labour Party over the coming months. But the Welsh Government has a clear policy on this matter. We have an agreement to introduce an optional move to the STV system that local government can choose if they so wish to do so. Personally, I would encourage all local authorities to do so. I believe that the single transferable vote system does deliver a fairer system. It delivers greater diversity and greater democratic accountability. So I hope, alongside the member for Cardiff North, that local government will embrace a move to proportionality over the coming years.
Russell George.
Joff Fawrth. Cabinet Secretary, you may have heard my answer, my question to the First Minister yesterday in regards to an ex-Montgomeryshire person who feels disenfranchised by the electoral system as an overseas voter. I'm not sure which way this particular constituent does cast their vote. I'm not sure whether the First Minister quite understood the intention of my questions. I wanted to raise it with you. From my understanding, this person is allowed to vote in general elections, but is barred from voting in Welsh Assembly or local government elections because they are considered so-called second-order elections. And the issue here is if a Welsh resident moves overseas, they can vote in Welsh elections. If a Welsh resident moves to an English or Scottish address, then moves overseas, they can't decide which nation to place themselves in if they live overseas. Is there anything that can be done to ensure that Welsh nationals who wish to do so can take part in Welsh Assembly elections or local government elections in Wales?
Bring them back. Presiding Officer, I'm not sure where to start. The result in Montgomeryshire last year has clearly worried my good friend from that part of the world. I will say to him very gently that I'm afraid the First Minister understood exactly and precisely the question that he was asking yesterday, and the First Minister's response is one that I'm afraid I will repeat this afternoon.
Leanne Wood.
A former employee of Cardiff Council has recently been to see me regarding a serious employment issue. He fell foul of an outdated provision in the 1972 Local Government Act, which meant that after his term as an elected councillor came to an end, he was barred from working for that council for 12 months. It was only after he'd worked for the council for 6 months did they realise that they had fallen foul of this provision. Despite no performance issues and with complete indignity, they sacked him on the spot. He received no support from the council, they failed to accommodate any alternative employment options, and after 13 months they appointed someone else to the role, despite that individual reapplying for their own job back. The council has refused a dialogue and failed to respond to a subject access request and now faces a tribunal as a result. Will the Cabinet Secretary agree to look into this case and the issue in general to ensure a fair outcome for this individual and others who could fall foul of this outdated rule in the future? And I would be more than happy to write to you with more detail if necessary.
I'm grateful to the members of correspondence on this matter. It does seem to me a better way of dealing with employment matters than raising them on the floor of the House.
Cwestiwn 4, Nick.
For Nick Ramsey.
You should have said that then.
Thank you.
Ask your question.
How does the Cabinet Secretary intend to work with local authorities to pilot new voting methods?
My officials are already working with the Association of Electoral Administrators, the Wales Electoral Coordination Board, the Electoral Reform Programme Board, as well as holding workshops across Wales with local authorities to discuss these and other electoral changes.
Diolch, Gwynidog, Cabinet Secretary, I should say. My question is nowhere near as exciting or as interesting as Russ George's was regarding voting rights abroad. But you've said, and forgive me because I do have this on my phone, you've recently, if I can just quote the figures first of all, for the last set of local council elections in Wales in May 2017, I think the voting turnout was 42% compared with 68.6% for the general election and 45.4% for the 2016 Assembly election. And you've said that local democracy is all about participation and you want to increase the franchise to 16-year-olds, to those in prison, to name but a few. Whilst this side of the chamber accept that increasing the franchise in certain areas at least is certainly not a bad thing, is there a concern, or would you accept a concern, that by doing that you could be masking a problem by avoiding from this point on a like-for-like comparison with general elections and with the Assembly elections as well? I probably haven't explained that too well myself either, Russ. So, whilst increasing the franchise is in some areas is to be welcomed as a good thing, and certainly in terms of 16-year-olds, I would agree with that increase in it. At the same time, we won't be able to look at these figures in future and say the council election votes are worse than others. Shouldn't you be addressing the basic problem, which is that people already register to vote and not voting enough in council elections?
Presiding Officer, the Plaid Cymru member for Mid and West Wales has answered the question as comprehensively from his seat as I could from here. You are, of course, comparing a percentage of the electorate, whatever the electorate happens to be in that election. So it continues to be absolutely and completely comparable. And I don't know if my good friend from another part of Monmouthshire is seeking to argue against changes of this way. I hope he isn't, because that is singly the worst argument that I've heard put in many years. I'll say to the member for Monmouthshire, we're all worried about the election result in Montgomeryshire now. I'll say to my friend from Monmouthshire that we are seeking to put in place a number of changes, and the purpose of those changes is to persuade more people to take part in local elections, to increase the number of people able to take part in elections, and to enable greater democratic accountability locally. All of these are very positive things, and I hope that we will have support on all sides of the chamber.
Mike Hedges.
Thank you. The first thing any voting system needs to be is secure. We should have a system which it does not allow either multi-voting or harvesting of votes. We do, however, need to make it easier to vote. Have the Welsh Government considered supporting two simple innovations, allowing early voting at a central voting centre, and secondly, allow voting at any polling station in the constituency?
Presiding Officer, I'd be very we are very happy to consider both of those suggestions. I would look towards electronic voting on different days, such as the weekend, mobile polling stations, electronic voting, and electronic counting as well. The point that the member for Swansea East makes about the security of a ballot is well made and accepted. We are working closely with an expert strategic group, the Electoral Reform Programme Board, upon which there are a number of representatives who are looking at ensuring that we have the security of a ballot as a prerequisite, but then looking creatively at how we move forward, enabling more people to take part in local democracy. That is our objective, and that is what we seek to achieve.
Question 5.
Question 5, Simon Thomas.
What provision has the Cabinet Secretary made for maintaining post offices?
My material.
Post office matters are non-devolved, as you know. I am, though, very conscious of the valuable services post offices often provide to local communities. Their role is particularly important in the context of the recent programme of bank closures in Wales.
Thank you for that response. And of course it is non-devolved, but the Welsh Government in the past has had a number of programmes to support post offices. A recent change in the way that the post office pays branches from what they call the core tier payment to a per transaction payment is having an impact on some post offices, particularly in rural areas. Yes, there are possibilities from time to time in terms of banking, but broadly speaking, these are fundamental payments for customers to pay for electricity and gas, for example. There's a small charge for doing that, but it's not even enough to cover the costs of paying staff and maintaining desk services and so on. Over the next week, I will be visiting a ford near Pwllheli, where there is a post office facing this particular difficulty. Are you having any discussions with the post office in terms of changes to these payments, and are you in a position to look at what further could be done to ensure that we don't lose this important resource? As you say, we're already losing our banks, and this is something that we need to retain, particularly in our villages and small towns.
I am aware that the member has written to me on this issue, and I have responded to him. It is possible, of course, for post offices to benefit from the business rate relief, and I hope that post offices will apply for that and hopefully may get some of that. On top of that, £1.3 million has been given to local authorities for their own use when they see a resource in the way that he has described is in danger of being lost, and they can offer some additional support on that. However, I am aware that the member is raising internal issues within the post office system, So if you would be willing to meet with me, I will be very happy to discuss that with the Central Post Office.
Madam Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, the decision by the Royal Bank of Scotland to close 162 branches in England and Wales has highlighted the importance of post offices in providing banking services, particularly in our rural areas. Given that 12% of post offices are now run by part-time outreach services, such as mobile vans and in premises like village halls, what is the Cabinet Secretary doing to ensure that communities that have lost their bank at least have access to banking services through a post office outreach facilities in our Wales? Thank you.
I have replied to the earlier question that these matters are not devolved matters, but clearly these are matters that the Welsh Government take a great interest in. We do ensure that, as I've already said, we have business relief and business support to enable small businesses to receive the support of the Welsh Government and local authorities in ensuring their sustainability. But, you know, I also think the United Kingdom Government has a very significant responsibility here. And I would very gently suggest to a Conservative member for South East Wales that he writes to his Conservative colleagues in London and explains to them very, very carefully that the taxpayer has spent a great deal of money keeping the banking system afloat, and it is high time that the taxpayer received some of that resource back in terms of the regulation of banks to ensure that there is communities are not put in this situation. So I would very gently say to the member, write to your colleagues in London and tell them to pull their fingers out.
Question 6, Leanne Wood.
Question 6, Leanne Wood.
The Cabinet Secretary make a statement on local government funding.
In addition to income raised locally, local authorities received £4.2 billion of general funding to spend on services in 2018-19. This continues our commitment to protect local government in Wales from the worst of the UK government's spending restrictions.
I've received many representations from schools in the Rhondda regarding the funding crisis that they face in this financial year and, of course, for the foreseeable future. Treorchy Comprehensive School alone has lost nearly £250,000 in this financial year, with no corresponding drop in pupil numbers. Then we have the state of some school buildings. One I visited recently posed a clear danger to the safety of pupils as a lump of concrete fell from a dilapidated roof in a classroom. Teachers are demotivated, schools dilapidated and pupils in danger. How will you ensure that local authorities receive sufficient money to ensure that school lessons are delivered in a suitable and safe environment and that classrooms are adequately staffed?
The member is aware of the situation facing the Welsh Government in terms of the UK Government's austerity programme. Had we received a similar funding basis this year as we received in 2010, then we would have received an additional, I think I'm looking at the Finance Minister, I'm delighted to walk back into the Chamber at this point, an additional £4 billion, £4.1 billion in order to sustain and support the public services she's described. I'm not going to stand here and defend for one moment the failed UK austerity programme. What I will say to her is that I have not met a single councillor of any political stripe who has said to me what we want to see is more Conservative policy and less Labour policy. What I've heard from every councillor across the whole of Wales is gratitude for protecting local government from the worst of the UK austerity programme.
Question 7, Julie.
Question 7, Julie Morgan.
Will the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on his latest meeting with the Ministry of Justice?
I am meeting with Edward Agar, MP, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Justice, and Rory Stewart, Minister of State for Prisons, next Monday, the 16th of July.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Will he be pressing for a women's residential centre in Wales after the UK Government announced a new female offender strategy on June the 27th? As I understand it, the 5 prisons that were planned to be built for women will be abandoned, and instead there will be 5 residential centres for women, which I think is entirely in line with a change in justice policy for women that many of us have pressed for a long time. So would he be pressing for one of those centres to be built in Wales?
Yes, I will be. I've made the case on a number of occasions, but I believe we do need a significant investment in the secure estate in Wales. I think anybody looking at the estate as it is today would understand that it is not designed for Wales's needs and has not been designed for, and is not fit for purpose to meet our needs today and in the future. In terms of female offending, I'm very, very anxious to ensure that we have a facility in Wales, Women's Centre, along the lines that the member describes, to provide support for women and, of course, to reduce the number of women in the criminal justice system. We want Welsh women to have safe and secure facilities to enable their effective care and rehabilitation. We also want to ensure that we are able to reduce the number of women in the system, and to that end we will be supporting a Women's Pathfinder project which is designed to deliver a women-specific whole system integrated approach to service provision for women who come into contact with the criminal justice system in Wales. So we want to see a holistic, comprehensive approach to policy in Wales which puts a woman at the centre of that policy and doesn't simply seek to build a women's prison which doesn't meet our needs today or in the future.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The